The email notification from the bank came through on a Tuesday afternoon while I was sitting in a parent-teacher conference learning that my daughter Olivia was excelling in her AP classes and should start thinking seriously about college applications. And Mrs. Henderson, the guidance counselor, was saying something about early decision deadlines and financial aid packages. And I was nodding along thinking about the college fund I'd been contributing to for 15 years. $500 every single month without fail, doing the math in my head and feeling proud that we'd managed to save what should be close to $90,000 with interest, enough to cover 4 years at a good state school or make a significant dent in private university costs. And I pulled out my phone to check the notification thinking it was probably just a routine security alert. But the subject line said, "Account balance alert savings, account ending in 7834. And when I opened it, the message said my account balance had fallen below the minimum threshold. Current balance was $47.32. And I stared at that number thinking there had to be a mistake, because the last time I'd checked that account maybe 6 months ago, it had been around $80,000, and there was no possible way it could be down to $47 unless the bank had been robbed or there'd been some catastrophic system error. I excused myself from the conference and called the bank from my car, my hands shaking as I waited on hold. And when I finally got through to a representative, I gave them my account number and asked them to explain why my balance was showing $47 when it should be showing somewhere around $90,000. And the representative put me on hold to check the account history. And when she came back on the line, her voice had changed from cheerful customer service to something more careful, more concerned, and she said, "Ma'am, I'm showing a series of transfers out of this account starting approximately 18 months ago. It looks like funds have been systematically transferred to another account at our bank. Would you like me to read you the transfer history?" And I said yes, read me everything. And she started going through the transfers. $5,000 transferred on this date, $3,000 transferred on that date, $10,000 transferred the next month. And as she read through 18 months of transfers, I felt my chest tightening because the total was coming to just over $90,000. Someone had systematically drained my daughter's college fund over a year and a half. And when I asked who authorized these transfers, the representative said, "The transfers were initiated online using the login credentials for the account. According to our records, the account has 2 authorized users, yourself and a Michael Chen. And Michael Chen was my husband. Was Olivia's father. Was the man I'd been married to for 17 years. I sat in my car in the school parking lot trying to process what I'd just learned, trying to find an innocent explanation for why Michael would have transferred $90,000 out of our daughter's college fund without telling me. And I couldn't think of a single legitimate reason. Couldn't imagine any emergency or investment opportunity that would justify draining an account we'd spent 15 years building for Olivia's future. And I thought about asking him directly, but something stopped me. Some instinct that said, if he'd been hiding this for 18 months, he'd just lie about it now. And I needed to understand what had happened before I confronted him. I drove home in a daze and went straight to our home office and opened our joint bank statements, the checking account we used for household expenses. And I started going through 18 months of transactions looking for anything unusual, looking for where that $90,000 had gone. And at first, I didn't see anything obvious. Our checking account balance was normal. Our bills were being paid on time. There were no large deposits or withdrawals that would explain the missing college fund. But then I started noticing smaller things, charges I didn't recognize, a recurring payment of $1,200 every month to something called Riverside Properties that I'd never heard of, multiple charges to high-end restaurants in the city that I knew we hadn't been to, charges to jewelry stores and clothing boutiques that I definitely hadn't shopped at. And when I added up all these unfamiliar charges over 18 months, they came to tens of thousands of dollars. Not quite 90,000, but substantial. And I realized Michael had been spending money on something or someone and hiding it by using our checking account in ways I wouldn't notice because I didn't check the statements carefully. I trusted him to manage our finances because he worked in banking, and I assumed he knew what he was doing. I pulled out my laptop and searched for Riverside Properties with our city name and found a luxury apartment complex downtown. The kind of place with floor-to-ceiling windows and concierge service and monthly rents that cost more than most people's mortgages. And I called their leasing office and said I was inquiring about a unit my husband was renting. I was Michael Chen's wife, and I needed to know the details of his lease. And the woman on the phone said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't give out that information without the tenant's permission, privacy policy." And I said, "I understand, but this is a marital asset and I have a right to know about it." And she said, "The best I can do is confirm whether a unit is leased under that name, but I can't provide details." And I said, "That's fine. Just tell me if Michael Chen has a lease with you." And after a moment she said, "Yes, Unit 2847. Lease started approximately 18 months ago." And I felt my stomach drop, because 18 months ago was exactly when the college fund transfers started. And I thanked her and hung up, and sat there trying to understand why my husband would be renting an apartment downtown, when we had a perfectly good house in the suburbs. Trying to find a reason that didn't end in the obvious conclusion that he was maintaining a second residence for reasons that couldn't be good. I spent the rest of the afternoon going through every financial document I could find, credit card statements, and bank records and investment accounts. And I found more evidence of Michael living some kind of double life. Hotel charges in our city on nights he'd supposedly been working late, dinner charges at romantic restaurants, multiple charges to a high-end salon that I'd never been to. And when I searched the salon's website, I saw they specialized in cosmetic procedures. Botox and fillers and laser treatments, the kind of place where women go to look younger and where their husbands or boyfriends pay for expensive maintenance. And I felt sick because I was starting to understand what had happened to Olivia's college fund. Michael had been supporting another woman, paying her rent and her dinners and her beauty treatments, and he'd funded this affair by stealing from our daughter's future. I wanted to confront him immediately, wanted to scream at him the moment he walked through the door, but I forced myself to wait, forced myself to gather more evidence, because I knew he'd try to lie or minimize or explain it away, and I wanted to have enough proof that he couldn't talk his way out of it, couldn't make me doubt what I was seeing. I hired a private investigator, found one through a divorce attorney's website and called her and explained the situation. And she said she could follow Michael, document where he was going and who he was with, and get me concrete evidence within a week. And I paid her retainer with money from my personal checking account that Michael didn't have access to, and I told her to start immediately. The investigator, a woman named Diana who'd been doing this for 20 years and had seen every variation of infidelity imaginable, called me 3 days later and said, "I have what you need. Your husband has been visiting an apartment at Riverside Properties every evening after work. He stays for 2 to 3 hours and then goes to various restaurants or returns home. There's a woman living in the apartment. I've got photos of them together, and I did some background research on her. Her name is Amber Sullivan. She's 26 years old. She works as a personal trainer at an upscale gym downtown. And hearing her age made me feel physically ill because I was 43. I'd given Michael the best years of my life, had raised his daughter and supported his career, and kept our home running while he worked long hours. And he'd rewarded my loyalty by spending our daughter's college fund on a woman barely older than our child. Deanna emailed me the photos, and I opened them on my laptop with hands that shook so badly I could barely click the mouse. And there was Michael walking into the Riverside Properties building. Michael and Amber on the balcony of what must be the apartment. Michael and Amber at a restaurant I recognized as one of the expensive charges I'd seen on our bank statements. And in every photo they looked comfortable together, looked like a couple. And there was one photo of them kissing outside the apartment building that made me want to throw my laptop across the room, because that kiss was intimate and familiar, was the kiss of two people who'd been together long enough to forget to hide. And I realized this wasn't a casual affair. This was a relationship. Michael had been building a whole second life with this woman and funding it with money he'd stolen from our daughter. I asked Diana to find out more about Amber, wanted to understand who this woman was who'd destroyed my family, and Diana called me back the next day and said, "I did some digging. Amber Sullivan works at Elite Fitness downtown. She's a personal trainer, and according to her social media, she's also trying to build an influencer brand. Lots of photos of workouts and healthy meals and motivational quotes. and I found some interesting information in public records. She had several cosmetic procedures done over the past year: breast augmentation, lip fillers, rhinoplasty, and the billing records show the procedures were paid for by Michael Chen. And I felt rage so pure it almost blinded me because Michael had paid for this woman's plastic surgery with money that was supposed to send our daughter to college, had prioritized making his girlfriend look Instagram perfect over securing our child's education. And the cruelty of that, the selfishness, made me understand that the man I'd married no longer existed, had been replaced by someone I didn't know and didn't want to know. I made an appointment with a divorce attorney, the one whose website had led me to Diana, and I brought all the evidence I'd gathered: the bank statements showing the drained college fund, the credit card charges for the apartment and the dinners and the plastic surgery, the photos Diana had taken of Michael and Amber together, and I laid it all out on the attorney's desk and said, I want a divorce and I want him to pay for what he's done. And the attorney, a sharp woman in her 50s named Patricia who looked like she'd handled 1,000 cases like mine, reviewed everything carefully and said, this is financial fraud. He stole marital assets to support an extramarital affair. We can absolutely use this to your advantage. You'll get the house, spousal support, and he'll have to replenish the college fund. But I need to warn you, this is going to get ugly. Men like this don't go down without a fight. They'll try to claim the money was theirs to spend, or that you're exaggerating, or that you're somehow at fault for pushing them away. So you need to be prepared for him to play dirty. And I said I was ready. I'd been pushed around enough, and it was time for Michael to face consequences. Patricia helped me open a separate bank account in just my name, and advised me to transfer half of our joint savings immediately before Michael could hide more money. And I did that, moved $35,000 into my new account. And then I changed all my passwords and locked down everything that was solely in my name. And Patricia said, tonight when he comes home, I want you to tell him calmly that you know about the affair and the apartment and the stolen college fund. Don't yell. Don't get emotional. Just state the facts and tell him you've filed for divorce, and hand him this packet of initial divorce papers. And then I want you to go stay with a friend or family member for a few days because his reaction is unpredictable, and I want you safe. And I agreed, even though part of me wanted to stay and fight, wanted to watch his face as I destroyed his comfortable life the way he'd destroyed mine. I arranged to stay with my sister Kate, who lived 30 minutes away, and had already offered me sanctuary when I'd called her crying 2 days earlier. And I packed a bag for myself, and for Olivia, who still didn't know anything was wrong, who thought her parents were happily married, and her college fund was secure and her future was certain. And I dreaded telling her the truth, but I knew I had to. Knew she deserved to understand why her life was about to change dramatically. Michael came home that evening at his usual time, 6:30, and he found me sitting at the kitchen table with printed bank statements and photos spread out in front of me. And he said, "Hey, honey, what are you working on?" And I said, "Sit down, Michael. We need to talk." And something in my voice must have warned him because his expression changed from casual to guarded. And he sat down slowly and said, "What's going on?" And I said, "I checked Olivia's college fund. The balance is $47. It should be $90,000. Where's the money, Michael?" And I watched him try to formulate a lie, watched his eyes dart around looking for an escape, and finally he said, "There were some investment opportunities that came up. I moved the money temporarily. I was going to tell you." And I said, "Don't lie to me. I have 18 months of transfer records. I have photos of you with Amber Sullivan. I know about the apartment. I know about the plastic surgery you paid for. I know everything. So don't insult me by pretending this is about investments." Michael's face went pale and he said, "Emma, let me explain." And I said, "There's nothing to explain. You stole $90,000 from our daughter's college fund to pay for your mistress's rent and plastic surgery. The evidence is all here. The only question now is what happens next." And I slid the divorce papers across the table and said, "I'm filing for divorce. You've destroyed this marriage and our daughter's trust, and you're going to pay back every cent you stole." And he picked up the papers with shaking hands and said, "You can't be serious. We can work through this. It was a mistake. I'll end things with Amber and we can go to counseling." And I laughed, a bitter sound that filled our kitchen. And I said, "You think counseling fixes theft and betrayal? You think I'm going to stay married to someone who chose his girlfriend's appearance over his daughter's education? You're delusional if you think there's any version of this where we stay together." Michael tried several different approaches, first apologizing and saying he'd been weak and stupid, then trying to blame me for being too focused on Olivia and not paying enough attention to him, then trying to minimize the affair by saying it wasn't serious and Amber didn't mean anything to him. And I listened to each excuse with growing disgust until finally I said, "Stop talking. Every word out of your mouth makes this worse. You made choices for 18 months, chose to lie to me every single day, chose to steal from our daughter, chose to build a relationship with another woman while coming home to me and pretending everything was fine. Those weren't mistakes. Those were calculated decisions. And now you get to live with the consequences." I told him I was leaving and taking Olivia to my sister's house, and he needed to be out of our house by the weekend. And he said, "This is my house too. You can't kick me out." And I said, "Actually, according to my attorney, I can file for exclusive possession based on your financial misconduct and infidelity. So either you leave voluntarily or I'll get a court order, your choice." And he looked shocked that I'd already consulted an attorney, already had a plan, already was 3 steps ahead of him. And he said, "You've been planning this." And I said, "No, you've been living a double life. I'm just responding to information I discovered 3 days ago. The fact that I've acted quickly doesn't mean I've been planning it. It means I'm not going to waste any more time on a marriage you destroyed months ago." I went upstairs and got Olivia from her room where she'd been doing homework with headphones on. And I said, "Pack a bag, sweetie. We're going to stay with Aunt Kate for a few days." And she said, "Why? What's wrong?" And I said, "I'll explain in the car, just trust me right now and pack." And she must have heard something in my voice because she didn't argue, just threw some clothes in a backpack along with her laptop and school books. And we went downstairs and Michael was still sitting at the kitchen table looking shell-shocked. And I said, "We'll talk through attorneys from now on. Don't contact me directly unless it's about Olivia's immediate needs." And I walked out with our daughter and drove to Kate's house while Olivia asked questions I didn't know how to answer yet. Kate lived in a small 2-bedroom house that felt cramped with 3 of us but safe. And after I'd gotten Olivia settled in the guest room, I sat down with Kate in her living room and told her everything, showed her all the evidence. And she looked at the photos of Michael with Amber and said, "I never liked him. I always thought he was too smooth, too good at saying the right things, and this proves my instincts were correct." And I said, "Why didn't you tell me you didn't like him?" And she said, "Because you loved him and I didn't want to be the sister who caused problems. But I'm telling you now, you deserve so much better than this. And I'm proud of you for not staying. So many women would try to make it work and you just walked away." That night I had to tell Olivia the truth, had to sit her down and explain that her father had been having an affair and had stolen the money from her college fund. And I watched her face as she processed this information, watched her go from confused to disbelieving to hurt to angry. And she said, "How could he do that? He's my dad. He's supposed to care about my future." And I said, "I don't know, sweetie. I don't understand it either, but I need you to know that we'll figure out college. I'll get a second job if I have to. I'll take out loans. We'll make it work." And she said, "But we shouldn't have to figure it out. There was money. He stole it." And I said, "You're right. It's not fair. And I'm going to fight to get that money back. But in the meantime, I need you to know you're going to be okay. We're both going to be okay." And she cried, and I held her, and I felt rage at Michael all over again for putting our daughter through this, for making her question whether her own father loved her enough to prioritize her future. The next few days were a blur of attorney meetings and court filings and Michael's increasingly desperate attempts to contact me. Texts saying we needed to talk, voicemails saying he'd made a mistake but could fix everything, emails explaining that Amber had meant nothing and he'd already ended things with her. And I ignored all of it, forwarded everything to Patricia, who said, "Good. Let him panic. Panicked men make mistakes, and we can use those mistakes against him in court." Michael's attorney reached out to Patricia trying to negotiate, offering to pay back the college fund in installments and asking if I'd consider reconciliation before filing for divorce. And Patricia told them absolutely not. Her client wanted a divorce and full restitution immediately. And Michael's attorney said he didn't have $90,000 in liquid assets. He'd spent it all. And Patricia said, then he can take out a loan or sell his car or figure it out. But my client isn't accepting installments. She wants the full amount returned to the college fund within 30 days, or were adding theft charges to the divorce proceedings. I went back to our house with Patricia and a police escort to get more of my things and found Michael had been living there like a depressed bachelor, dishes piled in the sink, empty takeout containers everywhere. And he was there when I arrived even though I'd told him I was coming so he could leave. And he tried to talk to me, tried to get me to listen to his explanations. And I said, "I have nothing to say to you. My attorney will handle everything from now on." And he said, "Emma, please. I know I fucked up, but we can fix this. I'll do anything." And I said, "You can't fix 18 months of lies. You can't fix stealing from our daughter. You can't undo the choice you made every single day to betray this family. The only thing you can do now is sign the divorce papers and repay the college fund and stay out of my way." And I took what I needed and left him standing in our kitchen looking lost and pathetic. And I felt nothing, no sympathy, no lingering love. Just cold clarity that the man I'd married was gone and had been replaced by a stranger I had no interest in knowing. The divorce process took 6 months and was exactly as ugly as Patricia had predicted. Michael fought everything, claimed the college fund was marital property he had a right to use, claimed the affair was my fault because I'd been emotionally distant, claimed he couldn't afford to repay $90,000 all at once, and Patricia destroyed every argument systematically, produced evidence of his financial fraud, deposed Amber, who admitted he'd been paying for everything including her plastic surgery, subpoenaed the apartment complex to get records of his lease payments, and built such an overwhelming case that Michael's attorney finally advised him to settle because going to trial would only make things worse. The settlement gave me the house, full custody of Olivia with Michael getting supervised visitation until she turned 18 and could decide for herself if she wanted a relationship with him, spousal support for 5 years, and a court order requiring Michael to repay the college fund in full within 90 days or face criminal charges for theft of marital assets. And he signed everything with a grim expression and then disappeared from our lives. Moved out of state according to mutual friends who'd taken my side after hearing what he'd done. And Olivia said she didn't want to see him, didn't want his calls or texts or attempts at reconciliation. And I supported her decision because she had a right to protect herself from someone who'd proven he didn't prioritize her well-being. Michael did repay the college fund, sold his car and took out a personal loan and somehow scraped together $90,000 within the 90-day deadline. And I watched the money transfer into the account and felt relief, but also anger because this proved he could have not stolen it in the first place, could have found other ways to support his affair if he'd been willing to sacrifice his own comfort instead of Olivia's future. And the fact that he chose the easy option of stealing from his daughter, rather than the harder option of being honest or ending the affair, showed his true character. Olivia was accepted to 3 excellent universities with significant merit scholarships because her grades and test scores were outstanding, and we visited all of them together, and she chose a school 3 hours away that had an excellent biology program and felt right to her. And when I wrote the first tuition check from the replenished college fund, I felt satisfaction that despite Michael's betrayal we'd gotten here, Olivia's future was secure, and she was going to get the education she deserved. The divorce was finalized 8 months after I'd found that bank notification, and I walked out of the courthouse feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because I was legally free from Michael, heavier because I was facing the reality of rebuilding my life at 43, of being single for the first time in nearly 20 years, of having to relearn who I was without the identity of wife and partner. And my therapist said this was normal, said divorce was grief even when it was necessary. And I needed to let myself feel all the emotions, the anger and sadness and relief and fear, needed to process what I'd lost even though what I'd lost was someone who'd betrayed me. I threw myself into work, got a promotion at the marketing firm where I'd been working part-time throughout Olivia's childhood, went full-time and took on bigger projects and rediscovered skills I'd let atrophy during my marriage. And my boss said I was thriving, said divorce had unlocked something in me. And I realized she was right. I'd been dimming myself for years to make Michael comfortable, had been small and accommodating and focused entirely on family. And now I was remembering that I had value beyond wife and mother, had talents and interests and ambitions that didn't revolve around supporting someone else's life. I heard through the grapevine that Michael and Amber had broken up shortly after the divorce was finalized, that she dumped him once the money dried up, once she realized he couldn't maintain the lifestyle he'd been providing. And I felt a grim satisfaction that he'd destroyed his family for a relationship that lasted less than 2 years, that he'd traded everything stable and real for something superficial and temporary. And the karmic justice of that felt appropriate even if it didn't undo the damage he'd caused. Olivia did eventually agree to see Michael after she started college, said she wanted to hear his explanation before deciding whether to have him in her life, and they met for coffee, and apparently he apologized and cried and tried to explain that he'd been going through a midlife crisis and had made terrible choices. And Olivia called me afterward and said his apology felt hollow, felt more about him wanting forgiveness than about understanding what he did to us. And I think I'm done. I don't need a father who has to work this hard to be mediocre. And I told her I supported whatever decision she made, that she didn't owe Michael anything just because he provided half her DNA. 2 years after the divorce, I started dating again. Nothing serious at first, just coffee dates and dinners with men I met through friends or dating apps. And I was surprised to find I enjoyed it. Enjoyed getting to know new people without the weight of history. Enjoyed first conversations and first kisses, and the possibility that maybe I could build something new. And I met someone eventually who felt right. A man named David who'd been divorced for 5 years and had 2 teenage sons and understood the complexity of rebuilding after betrayal. And we took things slowly. Didn't rush into anything serious. Just enjoyed each other's company and built trust gradually. And after a year of dating, he said, "I'm not Michael. I'm not going to lie to you or steal from you or prioritize anyone else over you. But I understand if you need time to believe that." And I said, "I'm learning to believe it. You show me every day through your actions, and that matters more than words." 3 years after finding that bank notification, I was living a completely different life. Was engaged to David. Was watching Olivia thrive at college. Was successful in my career. Was genuinely happy in a way I'd never been with Michael even before I knew about the affair. And I realized that discovering the stolen college fund had been the worst thing that happened to me. Best because it revealed truth I needed to know. Worst because the revelation destroyed my sense of security and forced me to confront that my marriage had been a lie. But the destruction had been necessary, had cleared space for me to build something better, something real, something based on honesty instead of performance. I looked back on that Tuesday afternoon in my car reading the bank notification, and I felt grateful to that version of myself who decided to investigate instead of accepting Michael's eventual lies, who trusted her instincts and hired an investigator and gathered evidence and acted quickly. Because a different version of myself might have confronted him without proof and been gaslit into staying, might have believed his explanations and wasted more years on a marriage that was already dead. And I was grateful I'd been strong enough and smart enough to walk away immediately. Olivia graduated college summa cum laude with a biology degree and got accepted to medical school. And at her graduation, she gave a speech about resilience and overcoming obstacles. And she talked about how her junior year of high school her world fell apart when she learned her father had stolen her college fund. And she thought her dreams were over. But her mother had fought for her, and the money was returned, and she'd gotten to attend her dream school. And she looked at me in the audience and said, "My mom taught me that when people betray you, the only option is to fight for yourself, to demand what you deserve, to never settle for less than your worth. And that lesson has shaped everything I've done since." And I cried because I'd worried for years that the divorce had damaged her, had stolen her sense of security, but instead it had taught her strength, had shown her that women don't have to accept betrayal. And that was a more valuable lesson than I could have planned. I ran into Amber once at a coffee shop downtown, recognized her from the photos Diana had taken, and we made eye contact, and I saw recognition and shame flash across her face. And she looked like she wanted to say something, but I just turned away and left because she wasn't worth my energy, wasn't worth my anger. She'd been young and stupid and probably thought Michael was going to leave me for her, probably believed his lies about our marriage being over. And while I didn't forgive her for her role in the destruction of my family, I also didn't need revenge or confrontation. I just needed her to not exist in my awareness. Michael tried to reach out when he heard I was engaged to David, sent me an email saying he was happy for me and hoped I'd found what I was looking for. And I deleted it without responding because his happiness or approval meant nothing to me. He'd forfeited the right to have an opinion about my life when he stole from our daughter. And I'd moved so far past him emotionally that even thinking about our marriage felt like remembering someone else's life. 4 years after the divorce, David and I got married in a small ceremony with just close family and friends. And Olivia was my maid of honor and gave a toast about second chances and choosing people who choose you back. And David promised to always be honest even when honesty was uncomfortable. And I believed him because he'd spent 3 years proving his character, proving that his words and actions aligned, proving that he understood the weight of trust and didn't take it for granted. We bought a house together, blended our families, created new traditions that had nothing to do with my past life with Michael, and I felt settled in a way I'd never felt in my first marriage. Felt like I was building on solid ground instead of sand. Felt like I could relax and trust and be vulnerable because David had earned that vulnerability through consistency and honesty and choosing me every single day. 5 years after discovering the stolen college fund, Olivia called me from medical school and said, "I just want you to know that everything that happened, all the pain and chaos of the divorce, it made me who I am. It taught me to value people who show up, people who do what they say they'll do, people who prioritize others over themselves, and I wouldn't be here without you fighting for me." And I told her she would have gotten here regardless because she was brilliant and driven, but she said, "No. You made it possible. You could have stayed with Dad and tried to make it work, and I would have ended up working full-time instead of going to college. Would have given up my dreams because the money was gone. But you fought and got the money back and showed me that you don't have to accept injustice. You can fight for what's right. And that lesson is why I'm going to be a doctor." And hearing that the worst period of our lives had ultimately made her stronger, had taught her resilience and self-advocacy, made everything we'd gone through feel worth it. Looking back now 6 years after that Tuesday afternoon bank notification, I can see that Michael's theft wasn't just financial. He stole my sense of safety, my ability to trust easily, my belief that people who love you protect you. But he also inadvertently gave me something valuable, gave me clarity about what I deserved, gave me the push I needed to stop settling, gave me the opportunity to rebuild my life in a way that actually served me instead of serving someone else's comfort. And while I'd never say I'm grateful for his betrayal, I am grateful for who I became because of it, grateful for the strength I discovered, grateful for the life I built from the wreckage, grateful that his worst choices led me to my best life. The college fund that Michael stole and then was forced to repay became a symbol for me, became proof that you can fight for what's yours. That betrayal doesn't have to be permanent damage, that sometimes the things people take from you can be recovered if you're willing to fight hard enough. And I carry that knowledge into every aspect of my life now, personal and professional. Carry the understanding that I don't have to accept loss or betrayal or injustice. I can demand better and fight until I get it. That agency, that sense of power over my own life, is worth more than any college fund, is the real inheritance I'm leaving for Olivia. The knowledge that she comes from a woman who doesn't accept defeat, who fights for what matters, who builds and rebuilds and keeps building until the life she's living matches the life she deserves. And that's the legacy I want, not the legacy of being a woman whose husband stole from her, but the legacy of being a woman who refused to let that theft define her future, who took what was broken and made it whole, who chose strength over bitterness, who chose rebuilding over revenge, who chose life over grief, and who taught her daughter through example that women don't have to stay small or quiet or accommodating when the people who should protect them become the people they need protection from. And in the end, that's the most valuable lesson I learned from Michael's betrayal, that you teach people how to treat you by what you accept. And I stopped accepting anything less than honesty and respect and prioritization. And my life became immeasurably better the moment I decided I deserved those things. The moment I stopped making myself small to fit into someone else's comfortable lies. The moment I chose truth over convenience and self-respect over false peace. And every good thing in my life now, my marriage to David, my relationship with Olivia, my career success, my inner peace, all of it traces back to that Tuesday afternoon when I got a bank notification and decided to investigate instead of trust, decided to verify instead of assume, decided to protect myself and my daughter instead of protecting my husband's secrets. And that decision, that moment of choosing clarity over comfort, changed everything, saved me years of continued betrayal, saved Olivia from watching her mother accept mistreatment, saved us both from a life built on foundations that were already crumbling. And I'm grateful for that Tuesday afternoon notification, grateful for the private investigator who found the truth, grateful for the attorney who fought for me, grateful for my sister who gave us sanctuary, grateful for every person who helped me escape a marriage that was poisoning me slowly. And most of all, I'm grateful for the woman I became in the aftermath, the woman who learned she was stronger than she thought, braver than she believed, more capable than she'd been told. And that woman, the one who emerged from the wreckage of her first marriage, that woman is someone I'm proud to be, someone I trust to make good decisions, someone I know will never again prioritize someone else's comfort over her own well-being, someone who understands that love without respect is manipulation, that commitment without honesty is imprisonment, that family built on lies will always collapse eventually, and better to face that collapse on your own terms than to wait until the damage is irreparable. Better to walk away with your dignity than to stay and watch it erode slowly. Better to be alone and whole than coupled and fractured. And I am whole now, finally, completely. And that wholeness is something no one can steal from me. No bank notification can threaten, no betrayal can touch. Because it's built on truth and self-knowledge and the understanding that I am enough, have always been enough, was never the problem in a marriage where the problem was someone who chose to steal from his own child to impress a woman who would leave him the moment the money stopped flowing. And the poetry of that. The karmic justice of Michael losing everything for nothing, losing his family and his credibility and his self-respect for a relationship that imploded the moment it cost him something. That feels like the universe correcting itself. Feels like proof that people who choose betrayal ultimately betray themselves. And I hope he learned something from it. Hope he became someone better. But honestly, his growth, or lack thereof, isn't my concern. My concern is my own continued evolution. My own journey toward being the best version of myself. And that journey includes letting go of resentment, includes forgiving not because he deserves it, but because I deserve peace, includes moving forward without looking back, includes building a life so good that my past becomes irrelevant. And I've done that. I am doing that. I will continue doing that. And that's victory, that's triumph, that's revenge without revenge, because the best revenge isn't hurting someone back. It's living so well that their absence becomes a gift instead of a wound. And Michael's absence is a gift. His betrayal was a gift disguised as devastation. His theft was an intervention I didn't know I needed. And I'm grateful now in a complicated way. Grateful that the universe gave me that bank notification at exactly the right time. Grateful that I was strong enough to act on it. Grateful that I'm here now, 6 years later. Happy and whole, and married to someone who would never steal from our children, who would never prioritize a mistress over his family, who shows up every day and chooses me with his actions, not just his words. And that consistency, that reliability, that bone-deep trust, is something I never had with Michael even before the betrayal. Even in the years I thought we were happy. And realizing that, understanding that my first marriage was never actually good, was always just adequate. Was always missing the depth of connection I have now. That realization is freeing, means I'm not grieving something real. I'm just mourning time wasted. And time wasted can't be recovered, but time moving forward can be spent wisely. And I'm spending it wisely now, investing in relationships that feed me, work that fulfills me, a life that reflects my values, and that's what thriving looks like after betrayal. Not pretending it didn't happen, but building something so much better that eventually the pain becomes just another part of your story. Not the story itself, just one chapter in a much longer book. And my story isn't finished. I'm still writing it, still building it, still choosing every day to be someone who fights for herself and her children, someone who demands honesty and gives it in return, someone who understands that peace comes from alignment between who you are and how you live. And I am aligned now, finally. And that alignment makes everything else possible.